You can start, Meenakshi.
Okay. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for making time to join me this evening, where I'm going to be presenting parts of my journey. And I say parts of my journey because I'm still journeying to a destination which I have an idea about, but I don't know when I will reach. While preparing for this presentation, I was rather clear on what I should title it. It's a word anthesis, which I used when we did the referent reality analysis of the sound of the forest. I still remember having delved into every word, every sentence, and every paragraph of that parable. And in those lines lay hidden many treasures which have lighted the path which I have traveled. And one of the words that struck me the most was the opening of a flower, Anthesis, which very aptly represents my state today. Let me begin by sharing the meaning of the word, the definition of the term, so that we have a very clear concept sense of what anthesis is. Anthesis is the action of opening up, of blooming, or the period of opening, which signifies the time taken for a flower to bloom. So today, in my sharing, I will be talking about my learning, what I have internalized, more importantly, what I have originalized, and that originalization is represented or expressed through the expressions I bear, through the way I have responded to people and events and situations excuse me, around me, the many shades of my behavior, my actions, small and big, and lastly, but not the least, the lucidity and fluidity of the language that I use. These being the critical evidences of my anthesis, I would like to begin with a few lines that I use to describe my journey.
Wait before that. You talked about concepts of the term anthesis. Because you have named the presentation on learning with the term anthesis, you may also have to talk about the referent of anthesis. What is probably the referent of anthesis? Yeah.
That's what I'm going to describe through my
No, no,
poem.
no. That is why I asked this question. If you talk about the anthesis of a flower,
Yes.
because the concept sense of anthesis, you talk about the duration or the period of a flower blooming. That is
Yes.
the concept
Yes.
sense. What is the referent of that? How would you describe or how would you report the anthesis flower in terms of its referent?
I have tried to describe that in my poem.
Okay. Oh, okay. Beautiful. Okay. So the referent of anthesis is given in the format of a poem.
Yes. And I have
That's a
also
poetic perception.
correct.
That's a poetic perception. That's a poetic interpretation. No doubt it is beautiful and much brilliant. But coming down a little bit, can you try to describe the referent of a flower opening?
The referent of a flower opening would be the movement of its petals, the rearrangement of its petals from being close together, closely held together as a bud, to rearranging themselves to face the light and to attract the bees and the butterflies.
All right, brilliant. So, what are the linkages? Can you talk a little bit about the reality of that process? Can a flower open by itself? Do you think it is opening by itself alone, without? No. Go further. What are the realities of that referent of the flower opening?
If I could be given a few minutes,
Yeah.
my learning process is in terms of those realities, which
Yeah,
describe the opening of the flower.
that is of course wonderful. But before that, my question is very simple. It is about the referent reality of a flower opening,
Yes.
not about the interpretations of your learning as an opening. That is beautiful. That we await to listen to. But before that, what do you think? The linkages involved, the reality involved in the opening of a flower. One you said, of course, the arrangement of the petals become redesigned and repositioned into a different modality by which it is open to the atmosphere, by which butterflies can locate it and all that. Anything else would you like to talk about it?
The opening up would also involve ascent of the pollen and the spread of fragrance of the flower.
1, 2.
Obviously, there is a transitioning of that entity from a bud to a flower. So there is a life stage change, I would say. But that should have been the first point, and then the description of the opening and what happens in the opening. So,
Okay, but how the transition was possible?
the transition was possible because of an inner movement. So,
How was that inner movement possible?
that's a chiming of nature process. It's the doing of the plant, not so much the flower. I would say it's a doing of the plant which allows the flower to open up, and we visibly see the blooming happening in the flower. But actually, the growth process or the life stage process is happening to the entire plant.
Why the flower opened?
The flower opened because that's the actualization of a flower. A flower is meant to open and present itself and attract and take the plant forward in its cycle of life.
All right. Okay. Now you
That's
can
the
proceed.
fulfillment of the flower.
All right. Now you can proceed. Yeah.
Thank you. So my poem again is titled Anthesis. In a gentle stir and a rustle quiet, I feel the petals part, blinking and squinting slight, opening up to the bright. A forming, a sprout, an energy yearning to be let out. What was within is now set to spring, inner beauty to unveil and fragrance to spread out. New patterns having formed, old habits have parted ways, colored lenses being replaced with a clarity in thought and gaze. The anthesis of a flower akin to the blooming of a self, both being private and soundless in revealing themselves. So in this poem, in the first two paragraphs, I describe the anthesis of a flower. And in the third and fourth paragraph, I describe my development and evolution. And in the last paragraph, I draw out similarities between the two.
In other words, you are using the anthesis of a flower as a case study, right?
Yeah, as a metaphor to describe myself.
All right, very beautiful. Now, when I asked you the question, what is the referent of anthesis of a flower, you said that after a few seconds, you said that is implied in the poem here in this slide.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. But what is the difference between?
Yeah.
But what is the difference between this poetic interpretation and reporting of the referent of the anthesis of a flower?
The reporting is factual, data-driven, comes from observations of having seen a flower open. When it comes to poetry, I have greater freedom in imagining the event and describing it as I see it.
All right. Okay. Proceed.
So, my description of my presentation being an embodiment of anthesis, I thought it would be appropriate to share with you why I picked a particular flower, the Egyptian blue lotus, to describe the opening. This is a metaphor or a symbolism which I had used in my first presentation on my learning and development. And at that point, I had chosen the Egyptian blue lotus for a reason, though I don't remember having shared the reason behind it at that point in time. Unlike any other flower, the lotus grows best in muddy water, in the most slushy place where nobody would like to go. And the interesting thing about it is once it blooms, the flower submerges itself in the muddy water every night and reblooms in the morning entirely dirt-free. I find that phenomenon so inspiring that you can be in adverse circumstances, you can be muddled in them, and yet you can bloom unaffected by them, untarnished by them. Probably it's for this reason that we also find the lotus being a representation and a symbol of a resurrection in various cultures, and therefore an indication of rebirth and spiritual enlightenment. Lotus comes in many colors, but I picked the blue lotus because it symbolizes clarity of thought, knowledge, and intelligence. These are attributes which I closely identify myself with, and hence my choice. Any story of development and growth and transitioning, I feel, must begin at the very beginning. So in my presentation, I have used 3 symbols to represent and convey the stages of my journey: the seed, the plant, and then the blooming flower. The seed provides a context for you to understand where I come from, and hence better appreciate where I am now. So my story goes back several years, and I'm sure mine is a unique story. The first critical incident that I remember was at age 10, when I was playing in a car porch, and I suddenly looked into the rear view mirror of my father's scooter. In that flash, when I looked at myself, I asked myself this question: who am I? I'm much more than this reflection in the mirror. It was an unusual question for a 10-year-old. The next year, in a similar event, as I was twirling on a bed, I look into a full-size mirror. But on that instance, I see myself. And the image that looks back at me was not me, but the image of 3 goddesses who were worshipped and venerated in my house. Years passed, but the goddesses stayed with me. Holding my hand and accompanying me through the ups and downs of life. And then I came to another critical turning point in the December of 2017, when I formally decided to take my inspiration for the 3 goddesses onto another level. And I told Master that I want to embark on this new project, which I have designed for myself. Coincidentally, and luckily for me, Master had also thought of the same project. Project Tripura Sundari began in December 2017 with my initiation under the guidance of my master, who has been leading me for many years, even before I started the project. In October 2018, I completed the process of initiation successfully. In October 2020, I had the great fortune of being part of the first phase of the Genius in Self Fellowship Program. And formally in January 2021, when I started the advanced level program with each one of you. Project Tripura Sundari is an extremely important event and a process and a project for me as a person. And my learning and development would not make sense if I don't describe its significance for me and what it has done to me. So when I thought of Project Tripura Sundari at that point in time, as I told you, I had this image of the three goddesses being with me. And hence the conceptualization of Tripura Sundari, the three beauties. When I read upon the goddess, I realized Tripura Sundari is actually one goddess. And the prettiest, as mythology would describe her, in three worlds. And it got me thinking, why the topmost attribute used to describe a woman should be her beauty. It cannot be. So the Tripuras, the three worlds of which she is the prettiest, have to be something much more significant. So I reconceptualize the three worlds as a goddess who ruled over the conscious realm, the subconscious realm, as well as the supraconscious realm of our mind. And thus began my quest to gain control or mastery over the three realms of the mind, and thereby become Tripura Sundari myself. With every step of this journey, I moved away from religion and mythology into the reality of myself, my creature, my mind, my spirit, my attendant spirit. My journey traverses to these three realms. And today I share with you a part of that journey, the distance that I have covered so far. Coming to the next representation. The flower is part of a plant's life cycle, which begins with the seed, the plant growing, and finally the flower blooming. So my learnings from the course is part of the flower plant, which has nourished me and which has enabled the blooming. And I describe this learning in three parts: the learning, the understanding, the knowledge. The internalization or the inner sense making, the connections I built with what I have learned, with what I already know, adding to what I know, correcting what I wrongly assumed. And from this inner rearrangement comes the originalization, making that knowledge my own, adding my own interpretation to it, living my interpretation. There are several things that I have learned from this course. And I'm in the process of writing up my interpretations and my originalizations of those many concepts. But today, I'm presenting only three. And someday, when all of them are done, I shall present it before you and before the world. My my first learning is about how does one glide through the gateless gate of words. When I was grappling with this concept of a gateless gate.
Just a minute, please pause, Meenakshi. I suggest every one of you to also try to see the reference of preferably every word of what Meenakshi is revealing. For example, glide. What is the referent of glide? Of course, we do not have sufficient time. Glide through the gateless gates of words. That's a very higher order idea there. I had told you both concept and idea has the same meaning. That is, both of them refer to the same meaning, mental impression. Okay. So you all have mental impressions about gliding through gateless gate, words, etc. All right. That's why language is quite popular and quite easy. But it may take a good amount of experience and practice to also see the reference of these words. Of course, we do not have the time for that, but insist yourself that you will have that mode of that deal of attention, which I call the second attention. Now, the first attention is quite easy with everybody. First attention, do not worry about the number. Or one orbit of attention is available for every human being. They listen to words, they understand and comprehend, and they may be able to explain it. But it requires the second attention to also have a glimpse of the possible, probable referent of these words. The word glide. What is the referent? Okay. So without any physically jerking movement, gliding, like the glider, you have heard of the glider, the gliding thing. You carry that glider to the top of a mountain and open the wings and you just glide. So glide, it's a very appropriate word because gateless gate can be most possibly traversed only through some kind of a gliding. So gliding through the gateless gates of words. The gateless gate itself is a very complex concept to see the referent. We are not going to the reference of the complex words. We touched only the symbol terms. As I told the other day in Navin's presentation, we have never bothered or we have never focused our attention on the referent of the word I. Similarly, we have not reflected upon the referent of the term gateless gate. So I just remind you, as much as possible, that's why Meenakshi is very carefully talking in a slow pace. Okay? All right.
Yes.
Okay, proceed, Meenakshi.
Thank you, Master. I thought a lot while choosing the word glide. I thought probably I should use the word crossing, and I wrote it even. But then, crossing did not go well with the concept of gateless gates, because you cross a barrier, you cross a hurdle, you cross a physical reality like a road, but not the gateless gate, which is a threshold but is unseen. It exists, yet we don't see it. So it's hard to tell when you are in front of it and when you have crossed it. And yet, you know that you have crossed it when you understand things better and when you know much more than what you knew before. When you have a greater clarity of what the words mean, and when you're able to see the reference which was labeled by a word. That's when I realized the word should be glide, which means to move across without obstruction over a surface. I have tried as much as possible to describe my experiences in these learnings. And that is why I say this is my originalization. So as I was gliding through the gateless gate of words, I could go beyond the word, beyond the label, to get a concept sense of what that word tries to represent. And this was possible because I was able to develop the capacity to identify this is the referent of that word, observe it so that I understand its detail, and then have a clearer sense of why I use a word or what another person meant when he or she used it. Now, what this has enabled me to do is to see beyond the apparent. And I use the word apparent to mean the label. Yeah, we know it, so what? And getting stuck in the label prevents us from understanding the why and the how. So gaining a clearer concept sense has enabled me to understand the underlying dimensions of something or the underpinnings of something. And that has been extremely useful, very developmental. That just expanded my scope of thinking and understanding. Of the many manifestations of that expansion of scope, one out of that many manifestations, I would never limit it to just what I have written. Yet what I think one of the important manifestations of that enhancement of scope has been my ability for creative reconceptualization. And here again, I deliberately use the word reconceptualization because as a grown woman, having been educated for many years and teaching for 19 years, I held a lot of conceptualizations. So for me, this learning from the sessions, from the fellowship, has very importantly helped me reconceptualize to a level which I never thought was possible for me. So what did I do with that capability of reconceptualization? I've been able to create new concepts of myself. Not new terms, but new descriptions of what we see. And most importantly, and I emphasize here, most importantly, reconceptualized ways of seeing myself. So when you talk about reconceptualization as a concept,
So that's
I have reconceptualized myself.
that's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. So each word that I've written here are the outcomes of my experimentation with myself. And Project Tripura Sundari is an experiment or a project where I am both the experimenter and the experimented. My second learning has been the discovery of the power of the will. So earlier, will was a word similar to several others in management for me, as in goal and action and plan and strategy and all of those. But going through this journey, I have understood the concept sense of will. The power of intentionality. Of that mystical, mysterious energy that rests within us that translates the will into action. For months together, I have been torn apart trying to identify the locus of the will and the spirit. Because again, they both are words. Unlike our ability to point out our eyes, our nose, our lips, it's not possible to find the locus of these. And yet I know they both exist. They both are the key. And they're so intertwined that often I'm unable to tell them apart. I continue in that confusion, though I know now, and I say I know now because I may change my interpretation tomorrow as I discover more of this process. But as it stands now, I feel the will aspect originates from the mind, while the spirit belongs to the energy of the creature that I am. But both are inextricably intertwined. Now, why is the concept of will so important, you may ask? As a teacher of organizational behavior, having taught a number of classes on understanding and interpreting human behavior, it's natural that one wonders, what are the key differentiators between people? Psychology and organizational behavior have ready answers for it. They talk about personality, they talk about predispositions, they talk about traits, characteristic, context, so many things. But I think the key differentiator between people is the power of their will. Because it is the power of the will which sets into motion all the engines of projection inspiration, imagination, visualization. And these are all critical processes for us to convert our thoughts and aspirations into reality. So there are many people who dream. I'm reminded of a serial which was there on Doordarshan when I was, I think, in my college. It was called Mungeri Lal Ke Haseen Sapne, about a fellow who only daydreamed and never worked to realize his dreams. In fact, Mungeri Lals are all around us. But those who have a clear will do more than just dream. What then is will? When I went deeper to understand the nature and process of will, it came across for me as first a vision. In many cases, not many, I think in most cases for me, it comes as an imagery. And that imagery I follow up with what actions would be required to achieve it. So it starts with an imagery or a vision, and then it's like a rehearsal of actions. But the conversion of the will, as I told you, I feel is locused in the mind. But the process of doing it happens through our energy. The energy gets you to get up and sit and type or read or exercise or take a long drive or do whatever the will had intended. So that intentionality is put into action, I feel, by this energy of the person, of the creature. And that's why I said they are both intrinsically intertwined in realizing whatever that we want to do. And which took me to another question. Is it as simple as just having a will? Or the energy which is always there in the creature? Because many visions don't actualize. So when I went into the instances where my will has been actualized, I felt they were all in instances where I was absolutely clear that this is what I want and I had no confusion or doubt about it. A moment when the body, mind, and spirit is completely aligned in its wish for something. And I found a word to describe that alignment. And the word is integrity. That entirely unified wanting, which converts the will into action by the combined forces of the mind-generated will and the creature-generated energy. This has been a life-changing learning for me. Absolutely life-changing. And the third one, even deeper than the deepest oceans. I think I'm swimming somewhere in the shallows. I have a long way to go. Okay, let me put it that way. I still have a long way to go. But I think I have gone deep enough for this realization to dawn on me. The realization is everything happens out of something else. Allow me to share with you the genesis of this question, which has brewed in my mind for so many years. more so when I began to train with Master. I'd say entirely so when I began to train with Master. Because several of our early years of interaction were in the form of questions which I would ask. Today, when I look back, I have no clue of what level of questions I asked him. And I'm sure some would have been rather stupid. But whatever, through those questions and through those conversations, there was a change happening in me. In many ways, unrelated to the question or having nothing to do with the question. And this always perplexed me. And as we are going through this course, and we would constantly be reminded that one of the objectives of the course is for us to be mentors and guides to others who would seek our guidance. That was when I began to get afraid. I can say with confidence, I have no fear. But this was a genuine anxiety for me because I could never understand what happened when I listened to Master describe something. Because the change in me, the transformation in me was something else. It's easy to label that process as new neuronal networks being created and new pathways being set. It was a simplistic ways of describing a very complex process. I still don't know what causes what. And that is a big problem. That was a source of anxiety for me because management only teaches cause and effect. What do you do to increase productivity? What do you do to increase morale? What do you do to motivate people? So it basically shook the foundations of what I taught in class and forced me to rethink life itself. Through that process, I've come out with 3 observations. The first one is that the process of anthesis comprises of multi-dimensional forces and factors. And anthesis here are used to represent both the flower and me, the person. So the causative factors are multi-dimensional and they're forces. They have their own dynamism, which can differ one from another. All of them together create outcomes. They all together create outcomes. So I'm thinking, where does this leave me, the person, or I, the person?